Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this evening's session. I'm Tom, and I will be doing the session and starting things off in just about a minute. I'm going to give everyone just probably 30 to 60 seconds to join, and then we will kick things off. Okay, we'll wait about another 20, 30 seconds because I can see the numbers still going up a little bit, and then we'll get started. Okay, that's great. So let's begin. And firstly, I just like to begin with a thank you. So thank you to everyone who's joined this session for giving up your evening, because I appreciate it's a beautiful summer day, or at least it is where I am in London. And there are probably much more exciting things you could be doing than joining a session talking about how to make productive use of your summer holidays. But hopefully today remains a helpful and worthwhile session, and you've already kind of taken the first step, hopefully, towards a productive summer by even joining this session. We'll be here probably for about 40, 45 minutes, so I'm keen with these evening sessions that we keep them pretty brisk and informative. And then there's just an opportunity at the end to ask any questions, so I'll answer a few questions at the end of today's session. And if you go to the question and answer box at the top of your Zoom tabs, then you should be able to submit those questions throughout the session. I won't probably answer any of those questions live while we're going through the presentation, but feel free to drop them into the box, and then we'll address a few of the kind of the top line questions at the end. But also at the end, there'll be a QR code, so a link to just book in directly for a one-to-one chat with a member of our team. And it's on those calls, so you can schedule those in directly at a convenient time. They're completely free, so completely complimentary calls. Then we can talk to you directly about individual situations, give tailored advice, and so on. And that's what I'd recommend if you've got kind of really niche questions or want to get into the weeds of how to plan a summer, or how to talk about and think about and strategize your application more generally. Okay, so feel free to drop those questions into the chat box at the top of your screens. But we are here to talk about summer, and basically term is either finished for most of you or term is about to finish. So quite a lot of schools are finishing tomorrow afternoon, and then quite a few more schools the week after, and then the week after that. So everyone's coming into their summer holidays and beginning to think about, okay, we've got 6 to 8 weeks of kind of free time. How do we use those 6 to 8 weeks as efficiently as possible? Sure, to have fun, but also to kind of use that opportunity, so that window of time, in service of your application to universities, and also hopefully more broadly in service of stuff you will do in the future more broadly. So work experience, volunteering, opportunities that might shape kind of even parts of your life beyond those university years. We'll do a quick introduction. So we're Oxbridge Applications, and we've been a leader in higher education advising since the late 20th century, so since 1999, so since a couple of years after I was born. So we've been doing this for a while, and basically we exist to support students and families who are applying to top UK universities. So it's not just, although this is what it says in the company letterhead, it's not just Oxford and Cambridge, it's also G5, it's Russell Group universities, it's basically any higher education in the UK which has competitive entrance criteria. So where you are fighting against other applicants for the place that you want. We work with, and our team is staffed by Oxbridge tutors and Oxbridge graduates in pretty much every academic field. So we've got an enormous amount of in-house expertise, kind of addressing and supporting students, targeting pretty much every program under the sun, every program it's possible to imagine. At some point, we have got a student in for not just every undergraduate program offered by Oxford, Cambridge, other top UK universities, but also pretty much every master's, every doctoral program as well. And the work we do is informed by research and guided by former admissions tutors. So we don't just work with Oxbridge graduates, and kind of our team isn't just staffed by Oxbridge graduates, but an enormous amount of the work we do with students and the work we're informed by is delivered by former admissions tutors. So people who've been professors or people who've been interviewers at Oxford or at Cambridge and have that real experience of assessing students for real places. Okay. And then just to introduce myself briefly. So I lead the consultancy team at Oxbridge Applications, and kind of as I've said, the company's role is to meet, talk to, and help strategize applications with students. And basically that's also what I do. So my day job is basically meeting students and families one-to-one, talking about university applications and trying to give the best advice possible around those applications. I lead our advising team on the Oxbridge side, but we also work, as I say, more broadly with G5 and Russell Group applicants in the UK. We support lots of students who are applying to English taught degrees in mainland Europe, so particularly the big business schools like Bocconi and IE. And we also support lots of American applications through our sister consultancy, A-List Education, every year as well. So kind of Ivy League and similarly competitive, so Stanford, MIT, those applications we work with a lot of students on as well. Okay. But let's talk about today. So I've tried to keep it fairly simple in terms of a breakdown of what we'll cover. And this will broadly kind of split into two categories, or at least I assume those of you who are attending who are students or the parents of students will be in two broad categories, in the sense that some of you will be coming up to your applications in the autumn. So some of you will just have finished or just be finishing year 12 and be basically staring down the gun of your applications and thinking about submitting everything in about 3 months' time. Others of you will have a little bit more time. So those of you who are just finishing year 9, year 10, year 11, you've got well over a year until your university applications go in, and you've got a little bit more time to kind of use this summer pretty flexibly and freely and dynamically to kind of develop your application, but also to explore in a kind of a less intense, less targeted, less kind of driven and focused way than those students who are trying to kind of pull together a lot of the application work over the summer, if they're in year 12, will do. Okay. So we'll talk about lots of different things today. So we'll talk about super-curricular development. So we'll talk about what super-curricular is and why that development matters and what sort of things constitute super-curricular development. We'll talk about work experience. We'll talk about volunteering opportunities. We'll talk about test preparation and essay competitions. And essentially, it's how to have a busy and useful summer. What I do want to say before we kind of kick off with all of that, though, is, and literally pivoting straight from saying having a busy and useful summer, I do want to say take proper time to relax. So the summer is long, and I'm sure, and I hope that quite a lot of you will have summer holidays already booked with families or with friends, and that you do, even if you're not going away for the summer, you do have rest periods. You do take a few weeks off. You do kind of find a rhythm over the summer that allows you to kind of do work and do productive things and find kind of opportunities that you don't have in term time. But I also want you to take time to relax, to reset, because the school year will begin again for most of you in September. And it's important that you're refreshed, relaxed, ready to hit the ground running and start working hard in September. And the summer is the slightly less pressured, or it should be the slightly less pressured part of your year. So you're free of school, sure, do some work, and we'll talk about what work is helpful, but also take time to relax, to reset, and go back in September in a happy, healthy, and as relaxed as possible frame of mind. So let's talk about, so broadly kind of, we'll talk a little bit now about year 10, year 11 summers, but I should also just say that a lot of the stuff we'll talk about with the summer after year 10, year 11, and also kind of year 8, year 9 by extension, if you're being super organized with your planning, a lot of this will also be relevant if you've just finished year 12 and you're in your kind of your final summer before those university applications. So this is mostly true of the year 12 students as well. So the obvious thing, particularly at the start of the summer, is visiting universities. So I hope that lots of you are either already visiting universities because the open day season is kind of in full swing at this point, or have booked to visit open days. So we've got the Oxford open days happening at the minute, and then the Cambridge open days coming up pretty soon. And then most of the other UK universities are also running their open days, so at the tail end of June and in the first half of July. So these are the big main summer open days where basically the universities are open and you can visit, and all the departments are open, and there are professors and lecturers giving talks, and there are lots of current undergraduate students floating around and giving tours to students who might be applying this year or in a year or two's time. Okay, so I cannot emphasize enough how much it is worth spending time and effort and energy going to open days for universities. It should not be a trivial decision, locking in the universities that you put on your UCAS shortlist, so those 5 university courses that you're applying to. It should be a serious, considered decision that's not just based on league tables and rankings and working out what the the top 5 or the top 10 universities for biology are according to a given ranking in a given year. It should also be based on you having visited most, if not all, of the universities you'd like to apply to, having been to the cities, been to the campuses, and committed to that application on the basis of actual direct experience. So lots of students will see that somewhere like UCL, for example, is a top 3, top 5 university in the UK for most of the courses it offers, but it's in the middle of London. And that can be a phenomenal thing for some students who want to be in the middle of a big, exciting city and want to live that young professional life as quickly and early as possible. It can be a terrible fit of university for other students who like the idea of being in a student bubble for the 3 or 4 years of their course and just want to be surrounded by other students in a fundamentally academic environment rather than being in a big, busy city and almost risking being lost in that atmosphere and that environment. So there is a full spectrum of university environments and atmospheres that you don't really get a full sense of unless you actually visit in person. So UCL is very different to somewhere like Durham, to somewhere like Oxford, and then both are very different to somewhere like St Andrews, which is even more isolated. And then all of those universities are very different to somewhere like Warwick, which is a campus university. So it's completely separate from any town or city and is just 30,000 students together broadly in one place. And it's only really from visiting those universities you'll get a proper sense of the kind of bubble, the kind of environment you might spend those 3 or 4 years in. And university, as I keep saying to applicants, should be 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. And a huge part of that is not just the quality of the course and the rankings that course has achieved in certain national league tables, or the concentration of world-class research that comes out of a given department at a given university. A lot of it is also, is that a happy place for you to spend those 3 or 4 years? And are you going to get on well? Are you going to get a good degree results? And that's basically done via open days. You can visit on non-open days, as I think I've noted there. Yeah, so you can visit on non-open days, because I appreciate a lot of universities offer only 2 or 3 days in the entire year for you to visit on a proper open day. It is best to visit on open days because everything is open and there are people giving tours and talks and you can access departments and see accommodation and so on. But if it's impossible, it's still worth visiting the cities or the towns or the campuses of universities and getting a general sense of them as places. Okay. And I would also say visit even only open to year 12. They're just trying to police their numbers a little bit. If you are an enthusiastic year 11 or even a year 10 student who wants to visit a few universities and who might well have a busy summer next year and be too busy to visit 10, 15 universities, then get 2 or 3 in the bag early, and it helps you make those decisions in advance, particularly about the type of university you'd like to go to. Okay. And again, university websites, we've framed it a little bit strongly here. They're not always quite propagandist, but they will give certainly a very rosy picture of the university's atmosphere, department's environment. It's only when you visit in person, see talks, see lectures, talk to current students, that you'll have a vaguely accurate impression of what your life at a university might be like in person. Okay. Particularly important to ask about accommodation on those open days. So ask current students about the accommodation, not just in first year. So they tend to make accessible on open days the fanciest freshers accommodation. Ask about second year accommodation, third year accommodation, and what that's like and how close it is to the centre of town. this is the main thing. So we talked about open days, and that's kind of a hopefully fun, adventurous thing to do at the start of the summer holidays. But the main bulk of your summer holidays, particularly if you're trying to use your summer holiday in the service of strengthening a competitive university application for Oxford, for Cambridge, for other top universities, it basically boils down to enhancing your super-curriculars. So super-curriculars, defined kind of in contradistinction to extracurriculars, are things that are beyond the curriculum, but that are still academic in focus. So extracurricular activities might be something like playing for the school cricket team. It might be something like volunteering on the weekend for a local food bank or a charity. So lots of great things fall into that extracurricular umbrella. And I hope that lots of you are already doing that kind of thing and keeping busy and well-rounded lives because of it. But what matters for the most part to the top competitive UK universities are super-curricular activities. So things that have a kind of an academic, a relatively direct academic dimension. And this goes through or runs through your whole application. So it should run through the personal statement you're either constructing over this summer, ready for an application in the autumn, or runs through basically the statement that you're going to be writing in a year or two's time, as well as potentially some of the written work you're submitting to universities, some of the additional forms you might be submitting to universities, particularly like Cambridge, which does have an additional form for you to complete when you apply. And then also that might come up in the interview discussion you have right at the tail end of the application process. What basically those universities want to see with supercurricular activities is that you are not just satisfied by your A-level content, that you might well be an A-level student who's predicted an A-star in history or in maths and further math or economics or geography, or in the equivalent IB or AP or French baccalaureate subjects. They want to see that you're not satisfied by that. They know that you're a strong student in school because on your application, your grades will be included and your teachers will provide those. But they want to see that you are someone who also does well in school and then gives up your own time, at least a certain amount of your own time, to read more broadly into the subject or the subject area that you want to study at university. What we'll tend to recommend, and this is pretty much true of all the subjects you can apply for at UK universities, is choosing broadly 3 to 5 topics that can help you focus your time most efficiently, and particularly focusing on what undergraduate students might do, choosing what you genuinely enjoy, and choosing not what you think might impress. So there's not much value in kind of playing this kind of in a game theory type way, saying, aha, I'm applying for English. I think the Oxford English admissions tutor is going to be super impressed if I've read Beowulf from the original, so let's go off and ruin my summer holiday by trying to do that. I say ruin. I studied English at Cambridge. I've never read Beowulf from the original. Literally the whole reason I didn't apply to Oxford and applied to Cambridge instead was that I didn't want to do Old English. So what you're enthusiastic about will be very, very different for different people. But basically it's following the lines of your interest and sure, keeping them academic, keeping them engaged and trying to move towards undergraduate level within those areas of interest, but not kind of playing too much of a game and just trying to kind of demolish undergraduate reading lists because that's what Oxford's website says is what's impressive. The admissions tutors always want to see a sense of you. So see what you're interested in as an individual when suddenly there is no A-level curriculum to kind of tie you to topics that you might not care about. As we said, get a broad understanding, so broad understanding of topics. There are lots of ways of doing that, but basically it tends to begin with reading. So I particularly recommend the Oxford Very Short Introduction series. So just a series of books that Oxford University Press publishes, typically written by quite decent kind of academics, just exploring basically every topic under the sun, everything from biochemistry to kind of Marxist literary theory to kind of behavioral economics to kind of microeconomics. Very short introduction series. There are hundreds of them, so would recommend those. Quite often schools give you access to digital copies of those for free online. And if you don't have access via school, then you can just pick them up on Amazon very cheaply. Get broad understandings of crucial topics, so core topics in your particular areas. Then pick 3 to 5 topics, dig deeper, and always be animated by this question, what would an undergraduate do? And again, you may not have the answer to that, so hopefully that's partly what we'll answer over the next few minutes. The kind of principle generally is go down the rabbit hole. So again, I'm an English grad. We've used an example of Chaucer here. So You might begin with Chaucer's The Merchant's Tale. So the Canterbury Tales are a pretty common thing on the kind of the key stage 3-4 syllabi. So you might have studied those in kind of year 7, year 8, year 9. Usually not in the original Chaucerian English, so usually in some element of translation. But kind of Chaucer is foundational to English literature, so mid 14th century with kind of transition to kind of early modern English happening around him. And you might read The Merchant's Tale, so one of the big common Canterbury tales in school, or have encountered it somehow fairly casually. But then if you want to apply to English at a top university, you might then go off and read more Chaucer. So you might read the prologue to Canterbury Tales. You might read other bits of his writing. You might then go on to read something like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, so a contemporary piece of literature, but that was written in a kind of completely different idiom, and that is, compared to Chaucer, almost incomprehensible. So you get to learn bits of English from 700 years ago by encountering different new things and kind of wrestle with the way syntax functioned in the mid 14th century. And then look at secondary criticism. So look at what critics, so what literary theorists and professors of literature have said about or commented on or identified as themes in particular areas of literature. And although this is a literary example, there are ways of doing this with basically every subject you can imagine applying for. So fundamentally, a lot of your summer, whatever your subject, should be about reading and exploring. In terms of ways to kind of look at these, so kind of basically source material to kind of pull this information from, a few different suggestions here. So academic magazines, so we've got History Today there, but there are also things like the London Review of Books. If you're applying things like economics, then there are things like The Economist, obviously, the Financial Times, Harvard Business Review that you can kind of draw information from. I think I've mentioned the London Review of Books for English applicants. If you're applying for something like medicine or biochemistry or biomedicine, then just medical journals and medical articles in those journals. So the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, things like that. And there may well be articles that you don't fully understand, but just pick and choose. Look at what you find interesting. And it's fine if you don't understand certain bits. Be brave, be ambitious, look at things, explore things, encounter things, wrestle with stuff that you don't completely understand yet. There are events and lectures. So this is one big thing to recommend. Lots of universities are either running live series of events and lectures, so kind of live webinars like this in different departments and topics over the summer. LSE is good for this, Imperial is good for this, UCL is good for this. So you can just go on all of those websites and their department websites and look at kind of UCL history lectures or UCL LSE kind of economics lectures or webinars over the summer. They also typically have YouTube channels. So you can go on the YouTube channels of major universities and kind of type in UCL history lecture and find lots of content. And again, just filter by the lines of your interest. You don't need to look at everything. You can also listen to podcasts. So Oxford University has a really good podcast archive that you can just go on you can literally just Google Oxford University podcasts, and then it will take you to the web page, and then you can filter that by department. You can type in keywords and see what comes up. So that can also be a really good piece of source material. You can also do things like competitions. So everyone's aware of kind of the John Locke essay competition. So that's the most famous of all the essay competitions that are run by universities or kind of university affiliated bodies in the UK. But you can look at the John Locke prompts and see if any of those prompts for essays to maybe work on over the summer, particularly the summer between year 11 and year 12, might be interesting for you to begin looking at. Or you can look at individual colleges, so individual Oxbridge colleges, so colleges like Newnham and Fitzwilliam and Trinity at Cambridge often run their own essay competitions and prizes. And so you can explore those and look around. And a lot of the resources you can access on our website. So we've got lots of blog articles on our main website that collate the information about those essay competitions and about things like open days and about lectures and resources and events. So register with our website, look at our blog articles, and you can access quite a lot of that information quite easily. Already mentioned academic journal articles in the sense of kind of medical journals and so on, but also that works for all STEM subjects. It works for honestly every subject under the sun. So you can go on websites like JSTOR. So again, lots of you will have access to JSTOR via your schools and just type in keywords, see what comes up, see academic articles, look at them, explore them. JSTOR, a lot of it's a little bit out of date, but it's also completely for free if you register either via your school or just independently. I think it's 100 free articles you can access per month now. So there's way more easy, cheap, free access to information than there's ever been before. There are also online courses. So we've not clicked through to that, but there are online courses that are provided by places like Coursera, as you can see just in the side of the screen there. So Coursera is a good website. EDX is a good website that you can look at. So again, particularly for STEM subjects, Coursera and EDX, you can learn kind of coding, you can kind of learn introductions to Python, introductions to kind of university level robotics, introductions to university level statistical methods, that kind of stuff. And that links to a few of these different things that you could spend your summer beginning to explore. So developing technical skills, if you're particularly on the STEM or the social sciences, so kind of economics, geography, that side of the application spectrum, then technical skills and being able to develop some of those a little bit independently over the summer can be helpful both for your application and also getting a head start on the work you might be doing at university. So programming languages, kind of exploring things like Python, Excel modeling, so being really confident with using Excel toolkits. And again, lots of websites like EDX, Coursera have kind of free kind of introductory courses to things like Excel modeling, statistical methods, R values. If you're an engineering application, if you're an engineering applicant, then things like CAD, being able to use CAD programs and software is super helpful to have some sense of before you apply. Data visualization, again, that's basically true of any STEM or social science subject, how you present, use, visualize data and use it to inform the work and the research you might be doing. That core set of skills can also be really helpful for developing EPQ or extended essay projects and kind of defining the kind of the technical work that lies behind the project you're undertaking. So the summer is a little bit of spare time, hopefully, to develop, in some of your cases, technical skills. And SQL. So again, lots of these things you can do. So if any of this stuff is relevant to the subject that you think you might be applying for, or that you've decided you are applying for, and you feel you've not explored it properly or not begun to look at it in much detail, it's worth doing. Work experience. So a couple of important points to make on work experience. It's vital for medics. So if you're applying for medicine, then again, we're now far enough post-pandemic that universities are pretty much insisting that you have at least one or two tranches of decent quality work experience, unless you've got really significant kind of extenuating circumstances that prevented you from doing that. Similar for veterinary medicine, again, that can also be difficult to get proper work experience placements on. They'll be a little bit flexible with that, so it doesn't need to be kind of super high quality, kind of 2 weeks of shadowing a kind of a surgeon in a hospital setting. It can be volunteering in any kind of health or social care setting that counts towards that work experience requirement. So volunteering in a kind of in a nursing home, or volunteering at a vaccination clinic, or maybe just doing a little bit of shadowing on the reception of a GP surgery locally. Those opportunities can often be a little bit easier to pursue and come by than getting kind of full 2 weeks of formal work experience via hospitals. But the NHS, kind of a little part of its mandate is providing as many work experience opportunities to kind of future medics as possible. So be proactive in reaching out to local NHS trusts, local GP surgeries, nursing homes, vaccination clinics, all of that kind of stuff. Reach out, be persistent with it, see what comes up. And alongside that, you can also do stuff that's much less related to healthcare. So we do see students who get in for medicine who don't really have any direct healthcare work experience, but who have volunteered for their local football team as kind of a coach for a couple of years and have kind of supported younger students coaching and have demonstrated their commitment to something beyond their schoolwork via that route. And then maybe extended that by doing like a first aid qualification and being a designated first aider for a youth football team or something like that alongside it. So a lot of this in terms of work experience is how you sell it. Basically that you demonstrate you as a medicine or a veterinary medicine applicant care about what you're doing, have tried to pursue relevant work experience opportunities and have been productive and used your summer or your other holidays a little bit in service of that. Okay. Outside of those two core courses, it's not typically formally weighted, the presence of work experience on your application. So even things like law and engineering at the top universities, they don't expect you to have work experience. If you do, that's fine. It's worth mentioning in your application. If you spent kind of a week shadowing at a law firm or whatever it happens to be. But the admissions tutors are usually quite aware that some students can access opportunities that others can't. So if your mum or dad was a partner at a law firm, it might be a little bit easier for you to access work experience opportunities than it is for someone who didn't have a family or a personal connection. And so the admissions tutors were a little bit suspicious of that. It's still worth doing, still worth mentioning if you have access to those opportunities, and it's still worth just writing in to kind of local kind of law firms or engineering firms and seeing if they can do anything. But broadly, it doesn't tend to matter very much. And most of the high quality work experience at those firms and at companies more broadly is only really available to current undergraduate students. So they want people who are already 18, who have typically already left school and begun working at a university, and are then looking for those opportunities and those placements in the first year of their university and onwards. Okay, so don't obsess over that too much. And also a lot of firms and a lot of companies do kind of online work experience. So kind of those are not competitive applications. So lots of the big law firms, you can kind of Google the big law firms and just say kind of summer internship experience or kind of online virtual learning experience day. Again, a lot of that is targeted towards sixth formers. So you can have kind of taster and insight days that they quite often host just as online events. You might go through a couple of sample exercises, gives you a taste of what it might be to kind of work as a lawyer or work as an engineer or work in lots of different settings. So as a banker or something like that. Good things to do. So not a huge amount of value to your application, but might give you a taste of whether or not the career pathways you're considering are kind of worthwhile. Not worthwhile, but something that continue to interest you. Summary of Year 12. So let's talk about stuff that's specific to Year 12. So if you are staring down the gun of your applications and you are submitting your application in October, then preparing for admissions tests, particularly for Oxbridge applicants, where a vast majority of STEM and social science applications have admissions tests, it is worth sinking as much time as possible into the preparation for those. Some of them are skills-based, so tests like the TARA that's used by Oxford, so the test of academic reasoning, that is skills-based, so it's critical thinking, it's kind of largely an IQ test. You can train for it, you can get good at it, you can develop your exam technique, but it's not a content or a syllabus-based test. Whereas there are other tests like the ESAT, so that's the test used for engineering and lots of sciences subjects at Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial. They are syllabus-based, they are largely based on the A-level corresponding subjects, so maths, biology, chemistry, physics, depends a little bit on which sections you're taking, but they're largely based on the A-level syllabuses, and in some cases also based on GCSE content. There'll be bits you might not have covered in school yet, so go through the specifications for your entrance tests, make sure you're comfortable and familiar with them, sink time into doing past papers and mock papers. A lot of the work we do with students over the summer between their Year 12 and their Year 13 is tutoring them and preparing them for those entrance tests. And we produce our own papers, so our own mock papers, and have our own mock testing platform for a lot of those tests as well. Diarise regular practice. Don't make it an obsessive thing that you cram in the last week. Make it something that you do a few hours of each week over the summer. You can take breaks, you can take a couple of weeks off for your holidays or whatever, but block out time for it in an organised fashion. Personal statements. So personal statements, that's a big project for everyone over the summer, so it doesn't matter what course you're applying for. Again, we will do a little bit later in the summer personal statement specific webinars. So we will spend a full 45 minutes to an hour talking about those statements and what you should be doing and focusing on. So I won't go into too much detail here, but what I will say is the best personal statements are analytical and evaluative in the main. So they are not just listing out the impressive books you've read or the courses you've done or the work experience you've completed. They are talking about what you benefited from via those experiences. So analysing some of the stuff you've encountered, analysing source material, talking about the conclusions you drew in your EPQ, talking about what you took from work experience, why you found it interesting. They're interested in what you think rather than just summarising a load of impressive stuff. So analytical, evaluative, like high-level essays for any humanities subject at A-level, the best essays are mostly analytical and evaluative rather than descriptive. Written work, so again, lots of humanities subjects, particularly at Oxford and Cambridge, will ask you to submit 1 or 2 essays, so 1 or 2 sample essays as demonstrations of the kind of essays you can write on a regular week-to-week basis. They're often underestimated in terms of importance by schools and by applicants. So lots of schools will just kind of encourage you to submit a recent piece of work that you did for class that you got a decent mark on. Don't let them do that. Don't let your teachers just kind of casually let you submit a piece of work that you did decently well in terms of marks. Make sure you're thinking about this a little bit strategically, that if you've not already finished term, that you're talking to your teachers about the pieces of work you might like to submit, what meets the individual criteria for your subject or for the college you're applying to. And again, all of that is on the Oxford and the Cambridge websites about how long they want the essays to be, kind of what restrictions they place on the essays, whether they have to be pieces of schoolwork, which typically they'll ask for, but some colleges for some subjects are willing to accept essay competition essays or essays that you've worked on and revised a little bit more heavily than a standard piece of schoolwork. And I should are typically weighted just as heavily as the full admissions tests for STEM and social sciences subjects. So don't underestimate how important they are to your application, not the original in terms of live argument in, perhaps. Okay, so that's basically the core content I wanted to cover. So a couple of bits just to finish up, and then we'll do a few questions. One thing we are running over the summer, and this is a relatively new product and project for us. This is something that we're running to basically give students a summer research opportunity, so a structured summer research program. So our Oxbridge Research Scholars program is basically kind of like a summer EPQ or extended essay, whereby we pair students with a mentor for a series of sessions over the summer to build up an independent project. So a piece of written work, so an extended investigation in a topic that's typically related to the university course they want to apply to, that allows them to demonstrate their kind of their university level knowledge and commitment in a particular subject. So if you're applying for medicine, you might do a project kind of investigating mRNA vaccine technology and how that works, and how AI can accelerate the kind of the production of mRNA vaccines and what the future of that might look like. You might produce, if you're applying for history, a project trying to kind of use kind of R values and analysis to kind of model the economic output of a particular country in a particular period. So again, it's university led, so kind of university level professors review your research, and you'll be working with an Oxbridge graduate who's kind of supervising the work you're doing. And it's a really cool opportunity to do something structured over the summer there. So you can scan the QR code to find a little bit more out about that project, and you can also get in touch with us directly. And then the kind of final note I would say is you can just, as I said at the top of this session, book in with us directly for a call. So there's a completely free call. You can book in via that QR code. So I meet lots of families via those sessions. So I take lots of those calls, and then the rest of my team are also very happy to meet and chat. So you can scan the QR code, book in with us via Calendly, and you'll be sent a Zoom link at a convenient time. So you can choose your time slot to just spend 20 minutes on a call with us. So meet lots of families that way. Very happy to speak to individuals, so individual applicants, individual parents, but it's great if we have the whole family on that call so we can talk through everything, give some initial advice, and then talk also a little bit about how we might be able to help with an application. Okay, so hopefully that's fairly helpful, and we've got, I think, a few questions perhaps in the box. So let me just go through to a few questions, and if anyone does have any questions they've been sitting on, then feel free to go to the Q&A box, which should be at the top of your Zoom screens, and we can get that, or get a few of those answered. So we've got one question already, which is asking about whether it's better or whether it's best to know what you want to do or study by the summer holidays of year 10. It's not necessary by the summer holiday after year 10. Kind of the first inflection point in terms of really being decided about what you might want to study at university will typically be when you choose or lock in your A-level subjects partway through year 11. So until those subjects are locked in, and again, some schools will be flexible about letting you kind of choose and move around your A-level subjects even after their initial deadline. But up until the point you've chosen your A-level subjects and have narrowed down your academic specialisms, you're typically pretty free to just explore widely, to think about lots of different options. Lots of the students I meet in year 10 and year 11 have everything on the radar. So might be good at every subject at GCSE and might equally want to be a lawyer or kind of apply for medicine or apply for economics or history and just love all of their subjects. And so you're relatively free, somewhere between year 10 and year 11, to just explore lots of different subjects freely and independently. and begin to work out basically what long term you think you are, one, most gifted at, so most naturally talented at in terms of academic subjects, and two, what you enjoy the most. And that's a crucial thing, because if you're studying a subject at university, then it's 3 or 4 years of your life you're studying to a really high degree of intensity, and you want to make sure not just that you're good at it, but you're enthusiastic about the content. In terms of, okay, so we've got a question about, is it better to focus on reading books relevant to law and writing essays all summer, or doing one internship at a law firm? So ideally you do a little bit of a combination of those. So even if you can't get law firm work experience, there are lots of things specific for law that you can access in person. So lots of the UK courts are completely open to visitors. So you can visit local magistrates' courts and sit in on cases. So in the local area, even if you're not based in London and have, or kind of Manchester or big city and have access to kind of major courts directly, you can go to local magistrates' courts and see kind of the law in action, and that can be a good thing to do. But absolutely, alongside that, the main thing is doing reading. So something like law, for example, is an unusual subject to be doing for A-level. So most law applicants have not studied law as a subject prior to university. And so it's worth doing reading into not just kind of introductory law books, so kind of letters to a law student and all the kind of big Amazon bestseller classics, but also looking at summary judgments. So lots of the UK courts are not just open to kind of visitors to kind of like view proceedings in person, but also release summaries of the judgments they've handed down and what those judgments are based on and so on. So do lots of reading, research, and that's more valuable, I would say, overall than work experience would be on its own. Okay. We've got a student here with a school that requires them to take 4 A-level subjects, and they're planning to take history, English lit, economics, sociology, and an EPQ. The question is that a good combination for law at Oxford? Yes, that's a really good combination. So law probably is the most, kind of off the top of my head, it's probably the most flexible subject in terms of the A-level combinations you can do and still be a competitive law applicant. So when I was at Cambridge, I had friends who literally had done 3 or 4 STEM subjects and were law students. They were quite impressive. Most students for law, or most applicants for law, have done at least 1 or 2 core humanities subjects. So subjects like English, like history, like politics, like philosophy, that mean writing a lot of essays as part of your A-level, because that's the rhythm of a law degree. But in theory, with a good LNAT score, you can get into top law courses with a combination of STEM subjects, but most students will do a mixture, and that particular combination is a really good combination. If one of your subjects isn't related to your degree application, i.e. if you're doing kind of say geography as a 4th subject in an engineering application, does that disadvantage you over someone kind of versus someone who did chemistry as their 4th, so a more directly relevant subject? I would assume we're talking about you having, or you doing already the core subjects, maths, further maths and physics, if it's engineering. Not really. So there might be a very slight advantage for something like engineering if you are doing chemistry, or if you're doing something like computer science as a 4th subject, so something that tethers a little bit more tightly to the content of an engineering degree. But mostly they're just looking for double maths, physics, A stars predicted in those subjects, and then a very strong ESAT score. And that's mostly the case for most subjects, that it's the core 3 most relevant subjects, so the top 3 grades they will look for, because a lot of schools don't even let students do a 4th subject unless it's further math at A-level. So typically top 3 subjects, 3 A stars predicted in those, being relevant to the course. And then for most subjects, there'll be some exceptions, and particularly if it's a high-performing school and are contextualized more aggressively, then it can be helpful for the 4th subject to be relevant. But for the most part, relatively free choice, even for Oxbridge applications with the 4th subject, and you'll be fine. Okay. Just skimming through a few questions. So we'll finish up. Oh, I can see we've got lots of questions coming in now, which is great. And I'll just pick out a few that I think might be relevant as broadly as possible. So if you've got super specific questions, I apologize if I'm not able to answer them live today, but feel free to book in for a call and we can answer them directly one-to-one in person. Is it good to do an extra subject at GCSE than beyond, kind of basically beyond what your school is offering? Not unless you are very confident of getting a 9 in it relatively easily. So with GCSEs, general principle is quality over quantity. So I would much rather a student applies with 9 or 10 subjects and 9s in all of them versus applying with 13 subjects and half 8s and half 9s. So again, unless you think it's unless it's like a language you're already fluent in and it's basically a free 9, if it's going to potentially distract you from getting top grades in your other subjects offered by school, then I would tend to advise you not to bother. Is it worth dropping a 4th A level if you're struggling to get good grades in all 4? Yes. So for most subjects, there are some exceptions. So a lot of Cambridge and Oxford STEM subjects quite like you to be doing 4 subjects for A level the whole way through and expect you to have top grades in all of them. But for most social sciences and humanities subjects, even at Oxbridge, I tend to advise students, if they're struggling with the workload of 4 subjects, drop their 4th subject and focus on getting top grades in those 3 subjects that remain. So most again, there'll be some exceptions to this, but mostly applying with 3 A stars and a good reference letter from your school is better than applying with, say, 2 A stars and 2 A's. Okay. Just skimming through a few of these questions. Is an EPQ worth doing for an application to university? Yes, so an EPQ is worth doing. So if you have the bandwidth to do it, and again, particularly a lot of schools will make you do most of the work on your EPQ over the summer, in year 12 and year 13, it can be a really good thing for all subjects. It doesn't take the place of an additional A level. So particularly for STEM subjects, I tend to advise students with STEM subjects for Oxbridge to stick with 4 subjects and drop the EPQ. But for social sciences, for humanities, it's fine to do 3 subjects plus an EPQ. And the EPQ can be a nice structured bonus. And it can be something that, although the admissions tutors won't read your actual EPQ, that gives you a free paragraph of content on your personal statement. So absolutely worth doing. And again, it's a good framework for you to explore an area of your own interest. Okay, so then final question we'll address today is would I still recommend reading into the subject for maths? You can do. So you can do maths reading. So you can read academic articles, although a lot of maths is quite obscure at the doctoral level. So you may not have the framework of references to look at research papers automatically. With maths, honestly, that's a brutally simple application in the sense that nothing matters beyond how naturally gifted you are at maths and how much you care about it. And it tends to boil down to you getting super, super high marks in maths and further maths and getting strong reference letters from your teachers that give strong class references against the rest of your year group, and then doing very, very well in the admissions tests. So being very, very good at the TMUA, getting a 7.0 or above in the TMUA in the autumn, that will be massively, massively more important than whatever you put on your personal statement. Okay. With maths, you can do extracurricular things. You can do maths challenges and Olympiads and so on. But unless you've ranked and got gold medals at international maths Olympiads, then it tends not to carry massive amounts of weight. So entrance tests for maths, followed by the interview, tend to be the do or die thing. Okay. So I apologize that we don't have time to answer more questions. I will set you all free at this point. I hope the session's been helpful. And then, as I say, feel free to just book in with us for a call. So I apologise that I've only managed to answer a fraction of the questions you submitted, but it's great to see that you're all so enthusiastic, and we're more than happy to chat directly. So reach out to us. You can book in for a call. You can email us, and you can give us a call during working hours during the week. So get in touch, and we will help. Okay. Thank you so much. Hopefully that's helpful, and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.